Welcome back to The Health Hunt, a human, humble, and sometimes slightly obsessive exploration of how to understand your health before something goes wrong. Today's episode is one we've been really excited about because we're talking about something that sits right at the intersection of curiosity, anxiety, and prevention. Full body MRI scanning and the growing shift towards earlier detection in medicine. If you've listened to the show recently, you know that Dan and I both went through the experience of getting full body scans at Prenuvo. In episode 19 of this podcast, we shared the real and raw parts of how we felt leading up to the scans. And in episode 20, we recounted our experiences of what it's actually like inside the machine, including my MRI meltdown. We've also, since then, received our reports, and this information raised a lot of questions. Not just about what the scans show or don't show, but about the bigger picture. How does this fit into the future of healthcare? How should people think about preventative imaging? And how do you interpret all of that information without spiraling? So today we're joined by an expert who can help us answer those questions. Dr. Giuliana Zaccardelli, Chief of Staff at Prenuvo Clinics. And we'll be chatting with her about the growth of the company, what they're actually seeing in those types of scans, how interpretive care works, and how people should think about this kind of testing in a practical, real-world way. But before we dive in, you know what I've got to do. The Health Hunt podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. We are not medical professionals, and nothing shared should be considered medical advice. Always consult your healthcare provider before making changes to your health. So for those of you that haven't yet heard our previous episodes on Prenuvo, Prenuvo is a company focused on using whole body MRI imaging as a tool for proactive preventative health. And as the Chief of Staff for Prenuvo Clinics, Giuliana leverages her expertise to drive innovation in preventative personalized healthcare. She previously co-founded a digital health company focused on women's health and worked as a health economics and outcomes research analyst at Analysis Group. Giuliana holds an MD and an MBA from Northwestern University. Giuliana, welcome to The Health Hunt. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
So Dan and I, from our background and careers, we're very nerdy about all things business. So we kind of wanted to start by getting into questions about the business side of Prenuvo because it's very interesting to us. During our visit to the Boca office, which is where we had our scans, we were kind of struck by how active the center was, which made us curious about the broader growth of the company. So we noticed that there were MRI machines running constantly when we were going in, when we were going out. And it made us curious about how many scans Prenuvo has completed to date across all of its locations and what the growth trajectory of the business looks like.
Yeah, so we've done over 170,000 scans to date, and we're looking to bring Prenuvo to as many people as possible. Right now, we have 26 clinics operating across North America, Australia, and Europe, and we'll see where we go next.
I saw some interesting locations. I think Canada, maybe somewhere in Toronto. I'm from Toronto originally, so I'm always interested about how the people back home can get this kind of treatment.
Yeah, actually, Our initial location was in Vancouver, and we still operate there. Toronto has very strict rules around getting MRIs into the province. So we actually have a mobile trailer across the border in Buffalo to help service that market.
Well, that's actually very interesting. I didn't know anything about that. I've been in Florida since 2003, so I don't know if things have changed, but that's really interesting.
Julia, I'm curious, how do you pick your locations, and are there state-by-state regulations regarding how MRIs can be used in each of those locations?
There are. So I am not personally super involved in how we choose locations, but if you look at our map of where we are, right, you'll see most of the major cities in the US and Canada, Vancouver. But there are state-by-state regulations that sometimes make it difficult for us to enter a state. So a lot of states have something called a certificate of need law, where you have to prove that there's a need for another machine. And so you have to get essentially a license from the state government to bring a new MRI machine into that state. And so those states, it's very hard to enter. And so a lot of times we're not in those states because they have these additional regulations.
Interesting.
That is very interesting because that seems like a place where maybe regulation needs to change to keep up with what's happening in the medical world. Thank you for sharing that. So I'm also curious about with respect to sort of the marketing that you do, is that more forward facing to the clients or is it also geared towards doctors and understanding the need for these preventative scans?
It's definitely a mix of both. So we definitely want patients and people across the country to know about Prenuvo, know what we do, and understand our scan and what the value of our scan is. And so a lot of our marketing is geared towards patients and towards prospective patients. So to really help them understand what Prenuvo is, because it's very different and new for most people coming to see us. But it's also different and new for a lot of people in the healthcare system. And so we have programs where our radiologists, our preventive medicine doctors will do educational sessions and information for providers so they can also understand the value of a Prenuvo scan, whether it's potentially sharing that information with a patient who's interested in getting a scan, or after the scan, if they see a report, how they interpret that report and how they kind of help the patient figure out what the next steps are. So there's definitely a mix of both because Prenuvo is new for a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, we love that it's sort of helping to change the landscape of how people think about health. It's something we talk about a lot here. So this was something that kind of really came to mind, especially when we were going into the scans, because we saw a lot of that marketing. So we're just curious, like of the scans that were performed so far, are there statistics that you can share about how often something significant or potentially life-saving is discovered?
Yeah. So based on our internal data, about 5% or 1 in 20 Prenuvo scans have helped detect a potentially life-saving condition. And this reflects generally things that look cancerous or precancerous or brain aneurysms in our screening practice. But there are also other findings that we see that maybe wouldn't be kind of classified as life-saving, but that have huge impacts on patients' health and how they approach their care. And so another great example is fatty liver disease, where we can quantify that very accurately and help people understand if they have fatty liver, and then they can kind of go take that back to their provider or make other changes in their life to hopefully help reduce or change that.
Yeah, I always knew the liver was important, but I think eudaimonia, which is where we met one of your representatives. It's a conference here in South Florida, a health conference. And so I get a newsletter from them and they just did a whole article about the liver health and fatty liver. And so that's interesting that can be detected so well in the scans. Okay, so the only other one that I have right now would be, are there any other patient stories that really stand out, individual patient stories? I mean, obviously no names, but where early detection truly changed the outcome of somebody's life?
Yeah, so there are tons of stories of everything from finding an aneurysm that could have otherwise gone undetected and caused a stroke to finding a kidney cancer in a father of two who was able to have that removed and didn't have any symptoms. But I actually like to talk about a slightly different story because I think it showcases a little bit of a different side of Prenuvo. We have a patient who I've gotten to know, and her husband both came in to get Prenuvo scans. And on his scan, we found a late stage pancreatic cancer. He didn't have any symptoms, and pancreatic cancer is very deadly. And he chose not to undergo treatment because of the stage of his cancer. But the way she talks about it was how powerful that information was for them to be able to make choices and to live the end of his life the way they really wanted to. He didn't have any symptoms until the last 3 weeks of his life. And she talks about how different their life would have been if they had to make all of these decisions kind of under pressure in the last 3 weeks. And so I think that story is really powerful to me because we talk a lot at Prenuvo about the life-saving findings. We talk a lot about the health optimization findings that we can help patients with. But that one has always stuck with me, as a lot of times that somebody in the healthcare system may look at a patient like that and say, well, you didn't really change anything. That patient still ended up having the same trajectory of care. But she talks about how that knowledge was so powerful for them. And I think that's really what we provide at Prenuvo, is giving people the knowledge to make their own choices about their health.
That is such a beautiful story. I really appreciate you sharing that perspective, because as you were talking, I was having like a wow moment, because it's like sometimes you want to know that you have limited time if that's the real outcome, and you can do the things that maybe you would have put off. So that's very profound.
I'll just jump in there. That story sits very close to me because I lost my dad to stage 4 pancreatic cancer. And it was 6 to 8 weeks from diagnosis to death. And it was, it was just a lot. And I can tie in very much with that. And so, actually, one of the moderate findings on my Prenuvo scan was a 3 millimeter or less cyst on my pancreas, which, although not incredibly serious, will be followed up aggressively with my care team because of the past of my father and because just wanting to monitor the potential growth of that. So thank you for sharing that. And it definitely hits home.
Yeah, I think the thing that I think we give patients really is that agency over their health, right? Whether it's we find something that is life-saving and can be intervened earlier, whether it's we're giving people reassurance or we find things that help them optimize their health, or in rare cases like this couple to be able to make those choices about how they wanted to live the rest of his life. Like, I just think that's so powerful for people.
I think also the inverse of that, sometimes knowing that maybe something we're concerned about is fine.
Yeah.
I know that Dan had an experience that we talked about like that, where he had been thinking it was one thing and the scan came back clean. So that also allows you to release some of that anxiety. So I think it's a really comprehensive result that you're getting.
Yeah, I think either way, right, you have that knowledge now. And so you're able to really, whether it's reassurance and you're able to not worry about that, whether it's something that you had no idea about, but that you're going to kind of change. Like I have spinal degeneration in my neck. I have tech neck basically. And I didn't really notice any symptoms, but after my scan, I was like, oh yeah, I do get headaches. I do have a little bit of neck pain. And so now I'm making changes in a concerted effort not to look like this all day and to do exercises to strengthen it so that hopefully down the road I'm able to avoid things like painkillers or surgery, but I would have never done that if I hadn't seen that on my scan.
Yeah, my neck is a hot mess. And so it's just Prenuvo just confirmed what I already knew. But I will tell you that the game changer for me has been OsteoPillow. That when I wake up in the morning, that this new OsteoPillow I use, there's no headaches. It really kind of kicks me off to a good start of the day and allows my neck to kind of not be as severe during the day as usual. So just, hey,
cool.
Layperson pro tip.
Check that out. Yeah.
And we're not sponsored by OsteoPillow. I don't even know what that is. So just so you know that it's not a plug.
I'm bringing new things up. All right, we'll switch topics here. Thank you for all that useful information. Great story. Preventative medicine, something that we love. It's a core theme of the podcast, metrics, people being proactive about their health. Where do you see preventive medicine heading over the next 5 to 10 years? We're seeing so much with the full body MRIs. We're seeing biomarkers. People are testing the whole gamut of biomarkers with certain entities and wearables. How does this all fit into like an ecosystem of what's going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years, in your opinion?
I think we're in a very interesting time right now. One of the reasons that I'm at Prenuvo and I don't practice medicine is when I was in medical school, I was really struck by, we learned a lot about disease and how to treat disease, but there was not really any emphasis on health and how to keep people healthy. And I think what we're seeing is patients and people looking for that information in things like Prenuvo and things like wearables and things like lab testing, because the traditional way we've approached this in healthcare is not giving them what they need. And so I do think there is this switch now where more and more people, both in and outside of the healthcare system, are recognizing how important that is. So I am really hopeful that this change is going to become more, I would call it more mainstream or more the way we approach health, rather than it kind of being something that people have to go off and do on their own. But I think it's really powerful that it is coming from consumers who are looking for those insights, because it's really showing us that there has been a gap historically in how we approach health. And so I'm hopeful that kind of the rest of healthcare system and the more traditional healthcare system will start to catch up. And you are seeing this, right? There are health systems that big names that have longevity clinics or that are doing research around longevity, you're seeing more uptake of things like preventative imaging. So I definitely think it's moving in the right direction, but we still have a long way to go. And the healthcare system is built to be very reactive, right? Everything from how insurance pays out to, how hospital systems are set up. So I do think it's going to take some time, but we're really seeing this shift, I think, right now where people are really driving that and the healthcare system is catching up.
Yeah, Dan, so we had just interviewed a doctor and he said something along the lines of what you said that really had struck me. And it was that medical schools are following along with what they know is going to be on the exams. And the exams are about disease. And so that's what they teach you. And so that's, I think, obviously where a gap is. So, and I think too, people are probably becoming a little bit more educated. Like our theme here, and one of the themes is to be your own advocate and to do your own research. And I think as people are doing that, that's where they're starting to understand that they don't have to wait until something catastrophic happens. They can look for ways to prevent it or at least learn about it earlier.
Yeah. And I think the way I sometimes describe traditional healthcare like the Catholic Church, like they're always, 100 years, the Catholic Church is always like 100 years behind. Like healthcare is not 100 years behind, but a bit behind, right? And there's a lot of ingrained training, ingrained the way this is how things are done. And then there are a lot of systemic factors that oftentimes prevent change from happening too quickly in traditional healthcare. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? You don't just want to throw experimental treatments at people or something like that. But so I understand where some of that hesitancy comes from. But I think in the preventative health space, it has sort of kept people from getting what they want and what they're looking for. And I think you're totally right, Sandy, that like people now do have this sense of agency and feel this sense of agency around their health that is new and different. And I think we as a healthcare system, like we need to catch up.
I'm just curious. I know obviously Prenuvo does a really good job of front-facing marketing to the consumer. Really, really good job. Do they have any education pieces, or are they doing any education like on the back end of this to actual physicians to how to see these reports, how to understand these reports?
We do. Physicians can come to Prenuvo and get an educational scan where we give them educational information and they can experience it for themselves. And then we also do things like webinars and other materials that we provide to physicians to help them understand both whether this is for them because they're interested in maybe sending patients to Prenuvo or their patients have asked about Prenuvo, and then also how they kind of take that report, interpret it, contextualize it for the patient, if there are additional findings and tests that have to come out of that.
Yeah, I think that's very important because imagine somebody, hears about the scans and they're sort of on board and then they decide to talk to their doctor about it, but the doctor's not educated. So they don't necessarily even confirm that that's a good thing to do. So I think it definitely has to be coming from both sides, and that education is highly important.
I'll tell you what's also kind of wild is that, and this is not just Prenuvo, this is like an MRI thing, is that they give you physical CDs. I've brought these into other doctors and neurologists and I've said, can you read this for me? They're like, well, we don't have a CD player. I'm like, well, how can we actually get information to each other in a more streamlined, less archaic way? And just, I'm sure you're aware. I think it's very, talk about 100 years.
Fax machines also, hospitals are a big fan of those. Yeah, it's crazy. And we hate having to burn CDs, but to get those images to a lot of different doctors, that's how you have to do it. And part of the reason is just how fragmented the healthcare system is. Lots of hospitals, they have different imaging softwares that they use. They have different viewing platforms. They have different medical record systems. Your doctor down the street may have something totally different from the hospital that's across town. And so unfortunately, CDs are kind of, anyone can use them as long as they have a CD player, and then they can upload the images to their own viewing software. But it's just one aspect, I think, of how fragmented the healthcare system is, because you can't just digitally transfer those images. It is ridiculous.
Yeah, there you go. Been confirmed.
Yeah.
This is just a side note, but just so you know, Prenuvo ruined me because I am very claustrophobic, and I thought I was fine the morning of, and they put me in and I quickly yelled, "Take me out." And it took me a second time before I got through it. But once I got used to the visor and I really focused on, the movie and everything like that, it was significantly better. So now in my brain, I could never go into an MRI machine that doesn't have that technology because that just was life-saving. I thought I was going to be on here. I was telling the board tech, we're doing a podcast and I'm going to say I didn't do it. But anyway, I did do it. I just wanted to share that with you.
Well, I was a little bit nervous because Sandy went in 10 minutes before me and I got out and she was out 10 minutes after me. I'm like, oh boy, something's going down. But
yeah, it was. The machine also reset when I went back in the second time. So I had to come out not by my own choice. So it's like a lot of things. But again, I made it through and the technology was great and the techs were amazing.
Amazing.
So, yes,
absolutely amazing. Capital A on the amazing. Let's shift gears. Very important term, interpretive care. Can you define interpretive care for our audience? What does it mean for someone who's coming in getting a baseline scan or maybe pressing reset on their health? Just what's that concept defined as?
I would think of it as kind of taking your results and contextualizing them and then being able to act on them. And so one of the great things, I think, I don't know what your guys' experience was like, but I think one of the best parts of the Prenuvo experience is the consult afterwards, because it takes those findings and you're able to go through them with a provider. You're able to talk about your own life, your own health, your own goals, and really understand those findings and what the next steps are. And so I find that being able to contextualize that and then make those like lifestyle changes or whatever it might be is the most useful part, right? A scan one time is going to give you some information. It's going to give you a baseline, and that's so important. But you have to then go make those decisions on your own to impact your health. A scan is not in and of itself going to impact your health. And so whether it's you have mild fatty liver disease and you want to make dietary and exercise changes to try to reduce that, whether it's your spine is all messed up and you need to do exercises, it's really about taking those findings and contextualizing them and then bringing that back to your life.
All right. So now that we've covered the broader themes around preventative health and imaging, we're going to shift to some more practical questions that we kind of had as we went through the experience. And these are questions that are meant to help people better understand how to think about full body imaging and what the results mean in sort of an actionable and practical sense. And these are the kind of things that our listeners are always really asking us about. It's like, what does the report actually mean? What can they actually see on the scan? What happens when you get the results? Kind of you talked about, that consult that you have. And so this next segment is going to be really about helping people understand how to think about the full body imaging in a more practical way.
This is one I'm personally super curious about and, excited to hear more information about this and our listeners as well is what is the difference? My assumption, and it could be wrong, is that Prenuvo, the scan is a surveillance scan. It's a screening, and that you get this and it's kind of like walking through a metal detector. It will tell you some of the high level things. It'll point out some things, in most circumstances that could be interesting to know, informational, immediate, moderate, and so on and so forth. And then beyond that, you go for a diagnostic MRI that would maybe be more detailed. Am I seeing that right? Or am I in error in that?
You're on the right track. So Our scan is optimized to look across your whole body in under an hour. And we don't use contrast, and MRIs don't use radiation. And so our scans are set up differently than if you were to go to the doctor to get an MRI of your liver. You can think of MRI images as a stack of pictures. And so you're taking slices through your body. And so the slices, how thick those slices are or how close they are to each other, oftentimes diagnostic imaging, they'll be closer together because you're looking at a more targeted area. Oftentimes diagnostic imaging, we use contrast or other techniques. And so they are different. Prenuvo scan does not replace diagnostic imaging. So if your doctor told you to go get an MRI of your liver, a Prenuvo scan is not going to be right for you because our scan is not set up to look at your liver in the same way that a liver MRI is. We're really there to give a survey across the whole body and to look across all the different organs and look across your entire body in a way that is, again, as fast as possible without using contrast and still getting that imaging that we need.
Yeah, it was interesting. During my consult, and I just want to share this for listeners, I was told that the scan doesn't replace a mammogram, obviously for the reasons that you just said, but I didn't understand it until you explained it just now.
Yeah, and mammogram is a great example. Mammogram is very specific for picking up breast cancer. And there are other MRIs, like breast MRI, that are also really great at detecting breast cancer, but we don't use the coils. So you need like you remember the things that went on top of you, right, when you were in the scan?
That's
for the
squishy,
listeners.
yeah.
They're how do I describe it?
Are you talking about, yes, what, the big blanket thing? Is
Metal
The
that-
blanket
plates.
type thing?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
She called it a weighted blanket, but I realized
Yeah.
that was a euphemism for it being something else. But yes.
Yeah. So it's called an MRI coil, right? And so those go on top of your body when you're in the scan. But if you're going to do breast MRI, there's a specific breast coil, for example. So that's one way that our scan is a little bit different from a breast MRI scan. Breast MRI also uses contrast. We don't use contrast. So it just changes the sensitivity of what the scan can pick up.
But so in the example of breast, would it pick up some sort of a growth of some sort?
It can.
Okay.
It depends on the size and the characteristics of that growth, but we're not optimized for looking for breast cancer the same way a breast MRI or a mammogram is optimized for looking for breast cancer. So that's why it wouldn't replace that. It can also tell you if you have dense breast tissue, which can make breast cancer harder to find on mammogram. And so it can give you that information so you can make those informed decisions. But we're not a replacement for something like mammogram. We're not a replacement for colonoscopy, because a colonoscopy, you undergo the prep, your colon is clear, the doctor is directly visualizing the nodules. They can also take the polyps out and then test them, right? So we're not a replacement for other screening tests. We're more of a complement.
Got it. That's helpful.
Yeah, that's really important for people to manage expectations and understand what they're doing. And I mean, it's extremely effective, but just thank you for calling that out. And that was a really great explanation. Our listeners will appreciate that for sure. Switching again, kind of just taking a little deeper dive into this, I think there's a lot that comes at you in these reports for the interpretative side. And I would be curious if you could define nodules and cysts. I think they're kind of scary words for people. And maybe because of the size or what actually, if you define them, people can not be as scared or intimidated by those words.
Sure. So a nodule and a cyst are both growths inside your body. A nodule is a small, solid lesion, whereas a cyst is a fluid-filled lesion. They are very common. And so I have cysts that we found on my whole body scan. That doesn't mean that there's anything cancerous about them. There are other characteristics. A nodule or a cyst in and of itself can be totally benign. There are other characteristics sometimes that we look at or that will show up on MRI, depending on the size or how it looks, that may make it more or less likely to be cancer. And one of the things that our radiologists do is they scale these nodules or cysts on a rating scale and on how likely it is to be cancer. And so when you got your report, also that rating scale that the radiologist uses also kind of tracks back to the report, and you can see, I don't know if you remember on your report, it would say mild finding, moderate finding, severe finding, informational finding. And so we try to classify that for the patient so they understand what that means. Just like if they see the word nodule, it's not scary if it's a benign looking nodule. It would kind of show up, on the report as mild, potentially in that case.
Got it. Which so you were talking about statuses there. A lot of my statuses were assessed in green, and then they'd use verbiage such as no evidence, not detected. Should one who's reading that think that they're kind of in the clear, or is it just that is there some type of nuance there with those definitions?
So the absence of something on imaging does not necessarily mean that thing is not there. Nodules, for example, show up better when they are larger. They also show up better in certain tissues depending on the characteristics of the tissue. For example, lung tissue, because there's a lot of air in the lungs, it can be harder to detect nodules in the lung on MRI because of the air that's in the lungs. It kind of it doesn't make them stand out as much. And so when a radiologist is saying no evidence of, it means they didn't see it. But that doesn't mean that it's not there and it's really tiny, or that the characteristics of it made it hard to see, or because we are set up for screening, if you got dedicated imaging of that organ, that they might find something that we did not see on the exam. So that's kind of how the radiologist describes it. Now, generally, if if there is no evidence of things, I would say that is a very reassuring thing, right? And so if there is no evidence, I think people can take that as reassurance, but that doesn't mean necessarily that it's 100% not there.
So you had mentioned already that there is a consult that comes after you get your results. So for us, we got our results. We got an email about it. We logged in. We were able to see the whole report. So we had asked the women at the front desk. We didn't know about how the process works. So after our scans, we were all curious and nerdy. So we asked them and they explained to us, we get the report and then, you schedule this consultation. So we got our report. I think I got the email within the same day about scheduling it. And it was very quick. I scheduled it within a day or two. I know people are interested to know what happens. Can you kind of walk us through what that appointment is like and what the clinician is going through with the patient?
Sure. Yeah, I think the consult is part of almost the most important part of the whole process, because it's where we take the imaging and the findings and the report and we explain that to you, but also contextualize that for you. So we ask very detailed medical history questions when patients come to Prenuvo. And sometimes patients are wondering why we do that. It's very important for the radiologist. It helps them contextualize the findings when they're reading the scan. And then it also really helps the provider who's giving the consult to interpret those findings based on some of the information that you've given us. And so that consult, they will walk you through your report, but they'll also ask you questions about your lifestyle and your health goals. And if you have something like fatty liver, they may talk about things that you can do or how you might want to approach that. If you have a more serious finding, they can help answer those questions and help direct you to what the next step should be in your care. And I think the amount of information that people get out of Prenuvo is amazing, but I think it can also be overwhelming. For the first time somebody comes in, it's a lot of information that you're getting about yourself. And so the consult is a really great way to understand what's important, what you should focus on, how you think about what some of these things mean. And I just think it's the best part of the whole experience.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely makes things that may have been terrifying less scary because they're given context and you're given some sort of reassurance that, okay, here's maybe something you can look into, but also you're not dying, which we all want to hear. So is there anything that sort of falls outside of the scope of that consult?
So the provider who's giving your consult is not your medical doctor, right? So they don't have that ongoing relationship with you that maybe your primary care doctor does. So they're going to contextualize the findings, maybe ask you some questions, make some recommendations, but we're not going to prescribe medication. We're not going to write a referral for additional imaging. That's really the patient needs to take that back to their provider and get that, because that person has that ongoing relationship with them and can kind of help them make those decisions.
Okay. So do they recommend if they find something? Let me ask this question first, because I was curious how this happened. So if the scan shows something that is concerning in some way, how does Prenuvo handle the timing of sending the report? Do they still send the report out in advance, or do they schedule the consult at the same time? Because I can imagine what it's like if you got something that says you have a brain tumor.
Yeah.
Your consult.
Yeah. So we do have a different process. We have a classification framework, and if something falls into one of those higher tiers, we do it a little bit differently. We will have team members who reach out to the patient to schedule that consult. We're a little bit more aggressive about getting that consult scheduled because we do really want to talk to you about that. And then we will release the report in advance of the consult happening, but once that consult is scheduled. And we do that because we've tested over the history of Prenuvo, we've tested different ways of doing this. What we found that was patients who had the consult, had the report before the consult, were able to come prepared with questions in a way that they weren't if we were just giving them that information live during the consult. But we do kind of wait until that gets scheduled before we release the report. Now, there are patients who never respond to us, in which case we have a cadence at which we will release the report after we've tried to contact them a few times. But the goal for people who have those more urgent findings is really to get them on the phone, explain the finding to them, explain what it means and what their next steps should be.
Okay. Well, I'm glad that didn't happen to us, but also that's very helpful to know.
Yeah.
So just for context, Dan got his results, I don't know, I want to say a day or so. He texted me, he's like, the results are in. And I looked and I didn't have mine. And so immediately my brain went to, oh my God, there's something terrible. Nobody wants to tell me. And again, I realized that's not a thing, but that's, that little disconnect was a little interesting thing for us to go through.
Yeah, we generally read the reports, and there's a queue, right, of the reports. And so if the technologist notices something urgent on the scan, that gets bumped to the top of the queue. But otherwise, the radiologist kind of picked them up on the way that they came in. So maybe because you had 10 extra minutes in the scanner, you were behind Dan in the queue.
Probably. That actually answered a question, Dan, I know you had about that. He came out wondering about this.
Yeah. By the way, my Netflix was James Bond. It's No Time to Die. I didn't. I'm just letting you know. I just thought of that, and kind of
interesting
ironic.
theme.
Yeah, but I always wonder when they are undoing you, like all of the plates or the weighted blankets, and they're looking at you, and they've just seen your scan, which they've seen many scans. Like, do they know something, and they're not telling me? And so that was kind of the conversation I had with Sandy as we were walking. I'm like, God, do they know something? Like, do they know that? Like, and so I don't know. But you may not have any opinion on that, but I just was thinking of that.
Yeah, I mean, the technologists are generally very good, right? They look at these images all day. They've been trained. And so they are able, oftentimes, if something really serious, if they see something really odd or really serious, they do pick that up a lot of the times. And again, that kind of gets bumped up to the queue for the radiologist. But they're not radiologists, so there are some limitations there as well.
So this is the fun stuff, I guess, if this is fun for anybody. So we're going to ask you a series of questions. Just kind of give us like the first thing that comes to mind. So what is your favorite food or go-to restaurant?
Food is very important to me. I grew up, my parents have a restaurant. My grandparents are from Italy. We grew up cooking all the time. So it's very hard for me to pick a favorite food, but I will pick two. One is my nonna's pasta and meatballs. It's amazing. I have tried to replicate it, and I cannot make the meatballs the same way as her. She is still alive, and every time she tells me the recipe, she tells me something different. I think she's keeping a secret intentionally so that I can't make them as good as her. And then my other favorite food is sushi. I love sushi.
Me too. But a funny story, I think the first guest that we had on, her favorite food was also meatballs. So maybe there's a theme. Okay. A TV show you swear that everyone should watch. So we're curious. Well, let's do that one first. This is a two-part question.
TV show that everyone should watch.
Yeah.
I don't really watch a lot of TV. Yeah. But I am watching The Pit right now. And if you ever want to see the way traditional healthcare, like reactive healthcare system exists, The Pit is dramatic, but fairly accurate depiction of the emergency room. And so for the theme of this podcast, I would say go watch that, because it's kind of the complete opposite of how we approach healthcare at Prenuvo.
Oh, I love that. Okay. And also the second part is, what did you watch in your Prenuvo scan?
So I told you I don't watch a lot of TV.
Yeah.
I did watch I watched a show that I love, which is Sex and the City. I wanted something that I was going to be comfortable with. Yeah.
That's good.
I was nervous. I was going to be claustrophobic. So I was like, I'm just going to put on something that I know is going to make me comfortable. But I was fine when I got in there.
Yeah. I think it's probably because I had an MRI before and I freaked out. That's when I probably learned I was claustrophobic. So I think it was in my head. But I shared this before, but the one thing that really helped was when the movie was actually playing. The first time I went in, it was static. The second time I went, she turned it on. So that was for anyone going in, that's a good tip. Okay. A favorite musician or song that like always gets you revved up and excited?
I love electronic music. My favorite DJs are Odessa and Rufus Du Sol. They're kind of like chill electronic music. That's what I listen to.
Those are good choices.
I'm jumping in here. I used to spin house and trance music in law school.
Oh, nice.
Rufus Du Sol was my last show in Miami. They played 5,000 people at the Bayfront. And then the year after at that show, they played 25,000 people. And now obviously they're on tour this summer. So you're going after my heart.
Yeah, they're coming to Chicago. I will be seeing them. I'm very excited about that.
Love it.
Okay. So the next question, a wellness habit that you genuinely love, even if it's weird and quirky.
So it goes back to food for me. I think that food is so important, and prioritizing what you eat makes a huge difference for me in my energy, in my mood, in just how I feel. Like if I go to a bar and I have fried food, I feel it the next day. I just don't feel great. So I make a huge effort to cook healthy meals. They don't have to be elaborate. They're like, sometimes I'm making eggs and avocado toast, but like cooking things that are healthy is to me makes the biggest difference.
Yeah, I agree. I live off eggs and avocado. If that didn't exist, I don't know what I would eat every day, but yes. So we're on the same page. Okay, so one thing that you're currently personally working on in your own health journey.
So when I did my scan the last time, I did the enhanced scan, which includes advanced brain imaging and body composition. And my body composition told me that I don't have a lot of muscle and I have a lot of visceral fat, which is the fat around your organs, which was very surprising to me because I am a very small person. And visceral fat has a lot of negative long-term, it's been linked to a lot of negative long-term health outcomes. So I'm trying to go to the gym more and I'm trying to build some muscle.
I need to take a page out of your book because I probably fall in the exact same category.
I was shocked.
Yeah.
But I'm not a big like weightlifter. I've never been. So I'm trying to be better about that.
Okay. All right. So the last one, and it's kind of the opposite of all these questions, is a guilty pleasure or treat that makes you happy.
I love ice cream. Like I love ice cream. I know that's boring, but it is my favorite thing. I love it so much. And I also love to sleep, which is not a bad health habit, but I do love to sleep. Those are my two.
Me too. Like all I think about is sleeping in. Anytime I can just not get out of bed, it's like glory to me. So I get it.
Yeah. I am a big sleeper and a big ice cream eater.
Yeah. Okay, that's the end of the rapid fire.
Giuliana, this was such an informative, helpful conversation. One of the things we try to do on this podcast is help people feel less in the dark about their health. And I think this episode really did that as far as anyone in our listeners moving forward, current listeners who want to do a Prenuvo scan. So thank you so much for your time and insight.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, this was just delightful. So thank you again for all of your time. We hope everyone out there enjoyed this conversation as much as we did. We love episodes like this because they take something that can feel really intimidating, like medical scans, reports, and all the unknowns that come with them, and make them feel a little more understandable and a little less scary. And honestly, that's a big part of why we started this podcast in the first place, because most of us are just trying to figure out how to stay healthy without falling down the ChatGPT rabbit hole at 3 a.m. And Dan and I are not always successful at that. So thank you, Giuliana, for helping us and our listeners to make a little more sense of the world of preventative imaging and what these scans actually mean in real life. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you're following The Health Hunt wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you haven't already, we'd really love it if you left us a rating and review. It helps more people find the show, and it lets us keep having these conversations with people who are really interested in doing work in this health space. And if this episode sparked questions for you about scans, testing, prevention, or anything else that you want us to dig into, send them our way. A lot of our episodes start with something that one of you asked about, or something that made one of us spiral and decide we needed to investigate it on the microphone. So thanks for being here with us on The Health Hunt. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and we'll see you next time.